The rancher's silence. The land stretched wide and endless, a quilt of golden grass and weathered fences beneath the pale morning sky. Ethan Cole stood at the edge of his property, hands shoved into calloused pockets, watching the dust rise from the dirt road. He had been a widower for 3 years now, though some days it felt like 30. His wife's laughter still echoed in the rafters of the house, her absence marked by the careful silence he built around himself. Work filled most of his days, mending fences, tending cattle, watching the seasons roll on without pause. Yet no matter how much labor he sank into the ranch, the emptiness inside the house gnawed at him. He had not hired anyone since his wife's passing. He had survived on canned meals, stale bread, and coffee strong enough to burn the throat. But the neighbor Martha had finally convinced him. He needed help, someone to cook, someone to keep the home from collapsing into dust like the rest of his spirit. The sound of an engine broke the morning stillness. A weathered pickup came into view, carrying not only the woman he had agreed to hire, but also a small girl with her face pressed to the window. Ethan's jaw tightened. He had not asked for a child. The truck halted near the porch. The woman stepped out first, smoothing her plain cotton dress, her hair pulled back with a kind of tidy determination. "Mr. Cole?" she asked, voice carrying a note of respect, but also wariness. "Ethan'll do," he muttered, his tone clipped. She introduced herself as Clara Bennett, recently come from town, and her daughter, Lily, who peeked from behind her mother's skirt with wide, searching eyes. Clara's handshake was firm, though her fingers trembled faintly. Ethan noticed, then looked away, unwilling to linger on the softness of another's skin. "You'll handle the cooking, the cleaning," Ethan said, setting his terms like fence posts. "That's all. I don't need anything more." Clara nodded quickly, as if relieved by the simplicity. She explained little of her past, only that she needed steady work and a safe place for her daughter. Ethan did not press her. He never pressed anyone. The house received them with a creak of old wood and the faint scent of dust. Clara's eyes flickered across the unwashed dishes stacked in the sink, the piles of laundry in corners, the pantry nearly bare. It was not squalor, but it spoke of neglect, of a man living only to survive. Lily ran to the window and gasped at the sight of horses grazing in the distance. "Mama, look!" she exclaimed, her voice like a bell in the hollow rooms. Ethan startled at the sound, and used the brightness of a child's joy. For a fleeting second, the ranch seemed alive again. By noon, Clara had moved through the kitchen with quiet efficiency. She scrubbed pans, wiped counters, and set bread to warm. Ethan returned from the barns, sweat on his brow, and stopped short at the smell of food filling the air. It was the first home-cooked meal he had tasted in years. He sat at the table without invitation, watching Clara ladle stew into bowls. Lily chattered beside her mother, asking questions about the ranch, about the horses, about whether Ethan ever smiled. He cleared his throat, but said little, keeping his gaze fixed on the wooden table. Clara, however, noticed the shadows beneath his eyes, the way his hands lingered on the bowl as though anchoring himself. She said nothing, but she understood loneliness when she saw it. As evening settled, Clara tucked Lily into the small room prepared for them. The girl drifted quickly to sleep, murmuring about horses and open skies. Alone in the kitchen, Clara rinsed dishes beneath dim light. Ethan entered quietly, his presence filling the space with unspoken weight. "You did well today," he said at last, his voice low, almost reluctant. Clara looked up, surprised by the compliment. "Thank you. It feels good to be useful again." Their eyes met for a fraction longer than either intended. Ethan felt the old ache stir, one he had buried deep with his wife's memory. He looked away, jaw clenched, and left the room without another word. Clara exhaled slowly, drying her hands on a cloth. She had come only for work, nothing more. Yet already she sensed the walls of this ranch carried more than silence. They carried a man who guarded his grief like a secret, a man who had not asked for companionship, but whose loneliness radiated through every corner. Outside, the night wind brushed against the windows. The ranch lay quiet, but within its silence, Something fragile had begun, an unspoken tension, a thread of connection neither Ethan nor Clara meant to acknowledge. And yet both felt it. Boundaries and shadows. The days at the ranch settled into rhythm, though not without an undercurrent neither Ethan nor Clara dared name. Mornings began with the hiss of the coffee pot, the aroma drifting through the kitchen before dawn. Ethan would enter, boots heavy on the floorboards, and find Clara already at work, rolling dough, stirring pots, moving with a quiet determination that reminded him of everything he had once cherished and everything he feared to feel again. Clara, too, noticed the change in her own steps. At first, this job had been survival, a chance to steady her life and give Lily a safe home. Yet each morning when Ethan's shadow filled the kitchen doorway, she felt the air shift. His presence unsettled her in ways she refused to confess. The ranch itself became a stage for subtle encounters. Ethan began carrying firewood into the house instead of leaving it at the porch, setting it down near the stove where Clara worked. Once, their hands brushed when she reached for a log he held out. The contact was brief, accidental, yet it lingered in her mind long after. She scolded herself for the thought. After all, she was still raw from betrayal. Her husband's faithlessness had carved deep wounds. She had sworn to shield her heart, to focus only on Lily. Falling into another man's arms, especially one still bound to memory of his late wife, was not only foolish but dangerous. Yet temptation grew in silence. One evening, Lily begged Ethan to sit at the table with them. "It's not fair, Mr. Cole. Mama makes enough food for 3, and you always eat alone." Ethan hesitated, the spoon in his hand stilled. He glanced at Clara, as if seeking her permission. She offered a small nod. For the first time in years, Ethan joined a family meal. The conversation was light, mostly carried by Lily's endless curiosity. She asked about the horses, about storms on the plains, about whether Ethan had ever been afraid. He answered gruffly at first, but her innocence chipped away at his guarded tone. Clara watched as Ethan's eyes softened, his voice growing warmer. For a fleeting moment, the 3 of them resembled a family. But when Lily went to bed, silence returned. Clara gathered dishes while Ethan lingered by the door, torn between retreat and something else. "You didn't have to sit with us," Clara said softly, breaking the quiet. "It felt right," he admitted, surprising himself with the confession. Their gazes caught again, and Clara felt the pull. She looked away quickly, stacking plates, willing her heartbeat to steady. That night, Ethan dreamed of Clara. In the dream, she laughed, a sound he had not heard in the waking world, and the warmth of it filled the hollow spaces grief had left behind. He awoke angry at himself, furious that he could betray the memory of his wife even in sleep. The next day, he kept his distance. He left early for the pastures and returned late, speaking little. Clara sensed the shift. Though he avoided her eyes, she caught him watching when he thought she wasn't looking, his gaze sharp with conflict, like a man fighting against himself. Claire was no less troubled. Her body still remembered the warmth of his accidental touch, and her heart betrayed her with its quickening whenever his voice softened. She tried to focus on chores, on Lily's schooling, on keeping her distance. But when she caught Ethan standing at the barn doorway one afternoon, his expression unreadable as he watched her hang laundry in the breeze, her breath faltered. "Need something?" she asked, her tone steady though her pulse raced. "No," he said quickly, turning away, but the moment had already spoken louder than words. That evening, Clara sat by Lily's bedside, smoothing the child's hair as she drifted to sleep. In the stillness, Clara whispered a confession meant only for herself. "You promised you wouldn't feel again," she murmured, though the ache in her chest proved otherwise. Meanwhile, Ethan sat alone on the porch, the stars sharp above him, his hands curled around a cup of coffee gone cold. He told himself he had hired Clara only for her skills, nothing more. Yet the truth gnawed at him. The warmth she brought into his house was awakening something he had locked away. The ranch, once filled only with silence, now throbbed with unspoken tension. Every glance, every touch of hands, Every shared word threatened to pull them closer. As the night deepened, both lay restless in their separate rooms, caught between duty and desire, between loyalty to the past and the dangerous promise of something new. Neither admitted it aloud, but both already knew. They were standing at the edge of a boundary too fragile to last. The storm within. The storm arrived without warning, rolling across the plains with the fury of a wounded beast. Thunder cracked against the sky, rattling the old windows of the ranch house. Rain pounded the roof, drowning the familiar silence that had settled into their evenings. Ethan returned from the barn drenched, his shirt clinging to his broad frame, his hat dripping water onto the floor. Clara hurried to meet him with a towel, the gesture instinctive before she could think better of it. Their hands touched as she offered it, and for a heartbeat too long, neither moved. "Thank you," Ethan muttered, voice low, withdrawing as though the towel burned his skin. Clara's pulse quickened. She stepped back, scolding herself. It was only kindness, nothing more. Yet the way his eyes lingered on her made denial fragile. The storm knocked the power out, leaving the house in shadows. Clara lit a lantern, the soft glow spilling across the room, casting their faces in muted gold. Lily, frightened by the thunder, clung to her mother. Ethan crouched beside the girl, his rough hand steadying hers. "It's only noise," he assured, his voice surprisingly gentle. When Lily finally drifted into sleep, comforted by exhaustion, Ethan and Clara remained in the sitting room. The fire snapped in the hearth, their only companion. The house felt smaller, the distance between them too narrow. "You should rest," Ethan said, though his tone lacked conviction. "And you?" Clara asked, her voice quiet, vulnerable. "I haven't rested in years." The words slipped out before he could catch them. Clara looked at him, truly looked, past the stoic mask, into the grief carved deep into his features. She saw the loneliness there, raw and aching, and felt her own mirrored pain rise to meet it. They spoke then, words spilling easier than they had before. Ethan told her of his late wife, how she had loved the land, how the sickness had taken her too soon. Clara shared the wound of betrayal, her husband's infidelity, the way it had hollowed her trust. Their confessions were not rehearsed. They were pulled from the depths, carried by storm winds and firelight. In that moment, they were no longer employer and housekeeper, but two broken souls laying their burdens bare. The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. Ethan's hand rested on the arm of the chair, inches from Clara's. Slowly, without intent, her fingers drifted closer. When they touched, neither pulled away. "Clara," he whispered, her name rough in his throat, warning and plea all at once. She turned her face toward him, the lantern light catching the shine of her eyes. The space between them vanished in a breath. Their lips brushed, hesitant, trembling, as if testing the edge of something forbidden. The kiss deepened, desperate with need unspoken for too long. His hands framed her face, hers clung to his shirt. For a moment, the storm outside faded, leaving only the fire, the heat, the breaking of walls they had built around themselves. But when the moment passed, guilt surged. Clara tore herself away, her chest heaving. "This is wrong," she whispered, shaking her head. "I came here to work, to give Lily's safety, not this." Ethan finished, his own breath ragged. He turned from her, running a hand through his damp hair. "I never meant to. God, Clara, I never meant for this to happen." The fire crackled, filling the space their words could not. Clara pressed her hands to her lips, as though she could erase the kiss, the heat still burning there. They sat apart after that, silence stretched taut as wire. The storm raged on, but it was nothing compared to the turmoil within. Both knew a line had been crossed, a line they could not pretend away. When dawn came, pale light spilling over the wet fields, the storm had passed. Yet inside the house, the air remained charged, thick with the memory of what had transpired. Ethan saddled his horse early, claiming work in the far pasture. Clara busied herself in the kitchen, though her hands trembled as she kneaded dough. Every glance, every sound of footsteps in the hall reminded them of the night before. Nothing had been spoken, But everything had changed. A reckoning of hearts. Morning light spilled across the ranch, bright and merciless, as if determined to expose every secret the storm had hidden. Clara moved through the kitchen with careful precision, each motion deliberate, as though measured steps could quiet the storm inside her chest. She kneaded bread, stoked the fire, poured milk for Lily, all with trembling hands. The kiss lingered like a brand. Every time her fingers brushed her lips, she remembered Ethan's warmth, his desperate need, her own surrender. She had sworn she would not allow her heart to stray again, not after the wreckage her husband had left behind. Yet here she was, bound by desire to a man who had not asked for love, but had taken it all the same. Ethan avoided her gaze that morning. He came in from the pasture with mud on his boots and the scent of rain still clinging to him. Yet he moved through the house like a ghost. When Clara offered him coffee, his hand shook as he reached for the cup. Their eyes met only for a second, but the silence between them spoke volumes. Lily's chatter filled the room, oblivious to the weight pressing on the adults. She told Ethan about a bird she had seen, how its wings had shimmered in the wet grass. Ethan smiled faintly, a rare crack in his armor, but it vanished when Clara's eyes lingered too long. That evening, neighbor Martha arrived with a basket of preserves. She watched Ethan and Clara carefully as she set the jars on the counter. Clara thanked her, but Martha's gaze narrowed, sharp with suspicion. She had known Ethan for years, had watched him retreat into silence after his wife's death. Now, she saw something different in him, a softness that could only be explained by new company. "You're looking better these days, Ethan," Martha said, voice sly, almost as if someone's taking good care of you. Ethan's jaw tightened, and Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. She busied herself with the dishes, but her pulse pounded. She feared whispers, feared that what had begun in secrecy would soon be dragged into the light. Later that night, after Lily had gone to bed, Ethan stood by the barn, lantern light casting his shadow long against the walls. Clara approached, drawn by a force she could neither resist nor explain. "We can't go on like this," she said, her voice firm though her heart quivered. His eyes were storm-dark, full of conflict. "I know, but Clara, I can't." He stopped, searching for words, fists clenched at his sides. "I can't ignore what I feel. I tried, and it's tearing me apart." Her breath caught. The honesty in his voice struck deeper than any kiss. She stepped closer, but still left space between them. "And what of Lily? Of the past we both carry? This ranch is built on memories of your wife. Mine is built on betrayal. Are we not only adding to the wreckage?" Ethan's face softened, grief and hope colliding in his eyes. "Maybe, but maybe we're building something new. I don't want to live in silence anymore." Clara trembled, caught between fear and longing. She wanted safety, but safety had never filled her heart. Here, with Ethan, was danger, yet also the first taste of belonging she had felt in years. "I can't promise I'll stay if it means hiding," she whispered. "I won't live in shadows, Ethan." He reached for her hand, rough palm enveloping hers. "Then stay in the light with me. No more secrecy." For a moment, the world seemed to still. The barn was quiet save for the creak of wood, the flicker of lantern flame. Clara felt her resistance unravel. She had fought against desire, against guilt, against the judgment of others. But in Ethan's touch she found not ruin, but a chance at redemption. The night carried them into each other's arms once more, but this time without denial. There was still guilt, yes, and the past could not be erased. Yet as dawn approached, painting the horizon in pale gold, Clara knew a choice had been made. When Lily woke, she found her mother in the kitchen, smiling faintly as she stirred breakfast. Ethan entered soon after, his expression softer than Clara had ever seen. They exchanged no words, but the air between them had changed. Martha's suspicions would no doubt grow, and the world beyond the ranch might judge them harshly. Still, Clara felt lighter, as if the burden of silence had lifted. She was no longer just a hired woman. She was a woman who had dared to love again, even in the shadow of infidelity. The central conflict remained between past and present, guilt and desire, secrecy and truth. But as Ethan reached for the coffee pot, brushing against her hand with deliberate ease, Clara understood that the path forward would not be walked alone. For the first time in years, neither of them felt lonely.